start today with comments someone made, okay, and it's got to do with the fact that the other day I had an interview with Edward Dutton. He's got a channel, and we had a little interview debate, okay, and so that's what this comment is about. That's a good place to start today. It says, you talk past each other, okay, and I would say it was almost entirely your fault. You didn't present any convincing argument for your point of view, in particular regarding collapse of the genetic diversity. And he continues, says, Dutton's assertion of the increase of the genetic diversity, mostly harmful, is on full display every day all around us for everyone to see. Your example of how the chimpanzees are more genetically diverse than people has no weight. It is a static comparison, and it doesn't say anything about rate of change. What is he referring to? Real quick, he's referring to this article that I put up, and that it says that a troop of chimpanzees, okay, maybe 100 individuals, probably no more than that, maybe 150 at most, I would say, have more genetic diversity than 8 billion people of the human race. Okay, listen to that. There's more genetic diversity among these chimps than there is throughout the human race, all humans. Okay, there are differences between one human and another, but in general, compared to the chimps, we are all clones of each other. That's the point, okay? And so this is what this fellow is referring to. He says this is just a static point. It's not a rate, and he's correct. It's not a rate. We're not talking about a rate. We're talking about the fact that humans are not genetically diverse, and for that you don't need to know anything about a rate. Okay, so that's the first issue. But I want to address that other issue that he raises that could have been my fault. It's always to some degree the fault of the interviewee, okay? But there's also a problem with the interviewer. And the issue is as follows. First of all, I want you to know I sent Ed Dutton about 10 graphs, and they were all related to the subject matter that we were going to cover, and that was mass extinction, specifically the extinction of humans. That was what the talk was supposed to be about. Well, if you look at the video, those of you who have seen it already will find that no graph was ever shown. And then the second issue is that, and this happens, I can't blame him for it. It's partly my fault, his fault, both, I guess. It doesn't really matter whose fault it is. The point is we drifted into genetics, specifically genetic diversity. And that wasn't the subject I was going to cover, okay? I was going to cover the extinction of humans, and that really is unrelated, at least as far as humans per se are concerned, with genetic diversity. It has to do with economic collapse. So we never got to talk very deeply about the subject matter that I was scheduled to talk about. He didn't show any graphs that I put up there, which would have maybe allowed us to follow through the reasoning. Okay, none of that would happen. What happened is we drifted into genetic diversity. And let me tell you why, or one of the reasons why, a very important reason. Everybody today is an expert on genetics. Why? Because we're bombarded with this information daily. Okay, everywhere you read, the geneticists have taken over the world on calling the shots on genetics. And I talked about that, I think, a couple weeks ago or 1 week ago. And it has to do with this Human Genome Project. Okay, it started in the 1990s. And as you can see, it says the genomic revolution. And they talk about an expanding genomics industry. And how many billions have been invested, how many have been reaped, okay, and so on. It's more or less like this health issue. Everybody's a doctor today because all you do is go on the internet, Google it, Yahoo it, whatever, and you get the information. You have it at the tip of at your fingertips, you know. And so people form these opinions based on what they read, and there's a lot of information out there, so they can tell you, you shouldn't eat meat because of this, and you should, I don't know, eat fruits or veggies or whatever. Everybody's an expert, and likewise, everybody's an expert in genetics because there's so much information out there, and everybody reads a little bit here and there and informs their opinions. What's the problem? The problem with genetics, just like with mathematical physics, is that there are no competing theories, okay? Either they're not allowed, they're censored, or for some reason they don't get on the books. You don't see them on the internet. So here comes a guy like me who's got a different version of genetics, and of course you won't see my theory out there ever. And people say, well, Bill, you don't deserve to have your theory out there. This is not a question of raising your hand. It's a question of putting the theories out there so that they compete and everybody reaches his own conclusion. That's the way science should work. That's not the way science works. And it doesn't work that way because there are too many interests. Okay, that's the problem. Too many interests. If I have a theory that goes against these guys and a lot of people start believing this theory, well, these guys lose their job, their careers, their fame. Okay, and so it's a big problem. And again, so the problem is competing theories. That's the issue. And here, this guy already made up his mind. He made up his mind that, he says the assertion of the increase of genetic diversity is full display every day. He says he's proved it to himself. So he doesn't budge from that line of thinking. And comes a guy like me and says, look, we're losing genetic diversity. And what are you talking about, Bill? You're going against the grain. We've already proven that. Have we? Have we proven that we gain genetic diversity? And they say, yeah, see, the mutation rate happens every day for different people. We're 8 billion people, so that's got to be increasing. Okay, so let's find out where this goes. Here we have a fellow who more or less answers that with another comment, okay? And this fellow says, this is your main point, referring to the same thing, okay? Says, which is well known among ecologists, and I guess you would say geneticists and paleontologists as well. You would include those as well. As an endangered species dwindles, okay, it loses genetic variation. And even if the species rebounds, its level of genetic variation will not. And then he says something which I highlighted there, which I think is very important to keep here in this context. Genetic variation will only slowly be restored through the accumulation of mutations over many generations. Keep that last statement in mind, okay? It takes several generations to recover genetic variation, okay? It takes a long time. Okay, so the first criticism I have here, that wasn't my main point. In fact, he's got it in reverse. I proposed something that no one has proposed to this date. Not a single geneticist, not a single paleontologist, biologist, geologist, none of these people have proposed today. And that is the exact opposite of what he's saying there. I'm not talking about endangered species. An endangered species is one that is in the last throes. 10 individuals, that's an endangered species. 100 individuals, maybe at most, 200. Then they say, oh, this is an endangered species. We humans need to protect it. And when you have only 100, 200, maybe 10 of a given species, then you can say that the genetic diversity or variation dwindles. Okay? I'm saying exactly the opposite. I'm saying a species that expands demographically loses genetic diversity. We're not talking about an endangered species. We're talking about the exact opposite, one that expands demographically. It loses genetic diversity. That's what I'm saying. Now, you don't have to agree with me, okay? I'm not here to twist your arm. I'm just saying that's what I'm saying, and I'm saying that no one has ever proposed that on planet Earth. Okay, so let's get that straight up front. Now, you say, well, Bill, you're crazy. How can you be saying that a species that is expanding, it has all these mutations, it accumulates them, right, over time, and you would think that, there should be more genetic diversity. Let's find out. This is the graph that I've got, and I did not, again, send this to Ed Dutton because I wasn't going to talk about genetics. Okay, I was going to talk about mass extinction. Okay, here is the graph. I showed it last time, and it's that after a species more or less settles in an area, it's already branched out from its main group. That's how a species is created. It can only lose genetic diversity. Why? Because you have population bottlenecks, specifically diseases. And then, when you chop a big branch or a very significant group of the population, what you're left is with this founder effect. That means that now you have fewer individuals from where you're going to draw the next set of genetics. You're going to increase your variation in genetics. And what did this guy say? Let me put that back up here again. Okay, this guy said, genetic variation will only slowly be restored through the accumulation of mutations over what? Many generations. So here's this poor species. It's trying to create this genetic diversity little by little, and then Mother Nature comes in there with a big, huge disease and kills half of them. Well, it doesn't matter how much they accumulated if Mother Nature is going to wipe out half their population. It doesn't really work that way, okay? But what I'm referring to here, let me get back in here. What I'm referring to here is that in the case of humans, for example, we have a little bit of history on that, so we can extrapolate that to other animals as well. And the way it works with humans, half of the children before the age of 5 would die, all the way up until the beginning of the 20th century. Well, really, I'm sorry, I'll correct that, beginning of the 19th century. So for 220 years, we stopped that process. Until then, half the children before the age of 5 would die. Okay? Now imagine that for any species of animals, including, you can include plants as well when they start out. If half of the offspring of any species dies when they're just coming out, okay, and they could be dying primarily of diseases because they're not used to these diseases, so maybe just to use the human numbers, before the age of 5 for whatever species, comparable to humans, before the age of 5, if they die, if half of them die, then you can see that the population doesn't really expand very fast because a lot of them are dying. They could die because a predator falls on them, on top of them, kills them. They could die because there's a disease. And so it's a very slow growth for many, many thousands of years until they finally get used to at least the endemic diseases and learn how to fight off some of the predators. Maybe they learn to run faster. Maybe they develop horns to be able to counterattack or whatever. So there's this arm race going on. And so the issue here is that a lot of the children die throughout most of a species' history. That's the typical curve. Okay, and I showed that curve, the curve of life. And so the issue here is that you're chopping off a lot of diversity and only allowing this tiny mutation that's happening over centuries, which you can kill in 1 second by wiping out either through this process, killing babies, or chopping off a big portion of the population because suddenly a disease came in there and killed half the population or whatever. So yes, it's much stronger, the mechanism of killing than is the mutation rate. Okay, that's essentially why I say that genetic diversity can only decline. And every time a disease comes and kills half the population, all you've done is streamline the genetic pool. Okay, you have fewer from, just pick a number. You got 1,000 individuals, you wipe out 500 of them. Now you have only 500 from which to draw the next generation. The founder's effect. So they start accumulating some of the genetic diversity that was lost with their pals that died. And then another big hit comes, another disease, or they move into a different area, or they have a new predator, or whatever. There's the jungle out there is very dangerous. And again, big chop, lost an arm, now you got to restart the whole thing all over again. So I'm saying that over time, mutations will not recover what you lose through bottlenecks, population bottlenecks, and founder's effect, primarily carried out by disease. It takes many centuries, many thousands of years for a species to adapt to diseases, and so that the disease becomes endemic. Once it becomes endemic, it's no longer such a killer. And the new generation, the generation can withstand it. Maybe some get sick, but they don't die anymore. And at some point, they become completely immune to it. Okay, so this is my argument. Okay, so yeah, this fellow has a problem. He says, I do get the idea of bottlenecks and founder effects, which I do not know if they are more important than the mutations over time. So how's he going to prove it? Is he going to wait 1 million years to be able to collect information on this and say, oh yeah, I finally proved it because through observation I was able to tell that that founder's effect and bottlenecks overcome the gradual mutations that we can have in our species. And now add to that inbreeding. Humans have been inbreeding for 200,000, 300,000 years. What I mean by that is that if you go back in time, the one you can still consider someone from your own species is if you can have viable children with that person. And if you go back 500,000 years, you probably wouldn't be able to have viable children, fertile children. You probably can go as far back as maybe 200, 300,000 years. This is an assumption, okay? You heard the mitochondrial Eve. She's 200,000 years old. That's more or less where I'm coming from. Those are the assumptions that I made, from which I part, okay? So you don't have to agree with them. I'm just saying that's where I start. I think that's a pretty good number, and I don't think we could go beyond 200, 300,000 years and still have viable children with whoever our ancestor was in those days, okay? Aside from the fact the guy was probably in Africa and was coming out, and here we've covered the planet, so we've been in different environments, we had different diseases that would kill that individual that do not kill us today. Okay, so that's more or less my reasoning on that. This fellow says, also he brings this issue up. He says, there is no intrinsic disadvantage to inbreeding. I like that. So we can inbreed. You can sleep with your sister and you'll be okay. Okay, that's what he's saying. It is solely statistically. Inbreeding done right purges the bad alleles out of the gene pool. Genetic purging. All it does is revealing the defects. It does not create them. Okay. On the other hand, there are intrinsic mechanisms of outbreeding depressions where it does create defects solely by itself. So he's saying that when you marry externally, you can run into trouble because you don't know what you're getting. On the other hand, if you marry internally, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with that. Okay, that's what he's saying. That's his argument. Okay? Similarly, and he gives an example of Icelandic studies have shown that third generation cousins, if they marry, they were okay, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, I think we've got a problem here. This fella, again, if you talk about what we have out there, the record, you would say that this guy is completely wrong. He's got it upside down. Okay, yeah, inbreeding is a serious problem. That's why we don't do it. Okay, and I gave you the example the other day of the kings of Spain there. Charles II was great grandson of Charles I, and he's got that Habsburg chin, and he was known as El Hechizado, the bewitched, because he was sick throughout his life. Everybody was waiting for him to die from day one, and he lived 39 years until he finally died. And we all know the case, or a lot of us know the case of the Romanovs, and they inbred, and because of that, they passed on this chromosome, which allowed them to be 9 of them, in fact, in the whole family since Victoria, which was their great grandmother, had 9 of them had hemophilia. And among them, Alexei Romanov. And then we know the case of the Amish. They've been around for 300 years. They started with 500 settlers approximately. And today there's like 330,000 of them. And what do you see now? Well, you see six-finger kids. Okay, among other big problems. They have Cohen's disease and who knows what. And they've got a lot of genetic problems. Why? Because they've been inbreeding. And so, no, inbreeding is not good, as this gentleman says. Totally wrong. And then at the bottom there, right, you'll see that if we were around for maybe 200 to 300,000 years ago, if those were our ancestors, the ones you see there, we've been inbreeding for 200, 300,000 years. And so you should not be surprised that today we have all kinds of serious problems. We're having more and more people be born with 2 heads, for example, with Siamese twins kind of thing. And you say, well, we've always had those. Absolutely not. The first one dates to, I don't remember the date exactly, but the first recorded case was, if I got it right, I think it's 1200, sometime around the 13th century, thereabouts. And why do I think that's the first case? Well, because no one documented a case before then. You would have thought that if the Greeks, the Romans, the Persians, people who wrote stuff that we see today, if they would have seen a kid with 2 heads alive, like living, walking around, I think a lot of people would have noticed that, someone would have written something about that kid or that pair of kids. And we don't have that. The first case, recorded case, if I've got it, I've had the exact date somewhere, but I should have brought that today. But if I've got it correct, the first case was a pair of girls, and I think it dates to the 13th century, which means that this is it didn't happen 200,000 years ago. This is something new, and it's got to do with inbreeding. And I'm going to go a step further and say that a lot of the autism that we see today among humans, homosexuality and all its variants, all that is related to inbreeding. Okay? That's my take on that. Okay? You don't have to agree. Again, I'm just giving you my version of that. Okay, and here we find an article in the Wikipedia, and just in case it reinforces what I just said, inbreeding results in more recessive traits manifesting themselves as the genomes of pair mates are more similar. Recessive traits can only occur in an offspring if present in both parents' genomes. The more genetically similar the parents are, the more often recessive traits appear in their offspring. In other words, if the parents are brother and sister, well, there you have it. You're going to have recessive traits. Consequently, the more closely related the breeding pair is, the more homozygous, deleterious genes the offspring may have, resulting in very unfit individuals. The fitness of homozygous recessive state may even be 0, meaning sterile or unviable offspring. So is inbreeding a problem? Well, I would say it is. Okay, I don't think you want to marry your sister, and if you marry your sister, do it only once, because if you marry your sister and then your kids, they marry, and then their kids marry, well, we got a serious problem on the third, fourth generation. You're going to have some kind of problem. And that's what's happened to the Amish. And that's what would happen if a pocket of humans survives the Holocaust, the economic collapse that I'm saying is imminent. If a group of people survive, let's say a family survives, and there's 10 to 15 or 20 individuals, within which we have only a small percentage, maybe 1/3 of them that can reproduce, and they're too closely related already, and that's one issue. We don't even have genetic diversity among the whole human race, but imagine brother and sister or cousins marrying. Okay, so they have a kid, and the other guy has a kid, and they're all from the same family. Well, next generation, they have a kid, and they come from the same founders, okay, founder effect. Well, what do you think is going to happen to third or fourth or fifth generation? Well, they're going to have 6 fingers, They're going to grow some weird stuff among the issue that they might come mentally defective. And so even if a pocket survives and they decide to have children, that's not going to be viable. At some point, it's going to crash anyways. So that's the end of humanity, one way or the other. Okay? So now you know my argument. Okay? You don't have to believe in it. I'm here just to give you my side of the story. Okay, another issue that was raised by by one of these fellows, Channel Island foxes have 99.9 homozygosity, okay? Yet they have remained at small population sizes with low diversity for many generations. But they also have an absence of inbreeding depression, and confirming that they are not afflicted with congenital defects common to other small and inbred populations. When you look it up in the Wikipedia, you find exactly the contrary. It says, Renee Wallenworth, an archaeologist, believes that inbreeding depression among these foxes, okay, can be managed by mixing different island fox subspecies populations, moving them to different islands. So yes, they do, according to this individual, have inbreeding depression. So all I can tell you is you may have your facts wrong again, okay? What can I say? Do a little more research, okay? We don't see eye to eye. Okay, let me move on here. Okay, this is the issue. The issue is that, I don't trust geneticists any farther than I can throw them. I don't trust paleontologists any further than I can throw them. Why? Neither one, especially paleontologists, since this discipline was invented, maybe 220 years ago, not one can explain extinction to you. They cannot tell you how mass extinction happens. They cannot tell you how one species disappears. And the main issue there is that they have to answer is selectivity. If you cannot answer why or how Mother Nature isolates one species or a group, an order of species, whether plants or animals, if you cannot explain that process for land, sea, and air, okay, you don't have a theory of extinction. If you don't have a theory of extinction, you are not a paleontologist, because a paleontologist, his only job is to explain extinction. Once we have an explanation for extinction, we're done with paleontology. They can continue dusting bones and assembling them for a museum. That's not paleontology. That's stamp collecting. Paleontologist has only one job as a scientist, and that is to explain extinction. And in 200 years, no one has been able to explain extinction. How do they explain it? Well, they do it ad hoc. They create one mechanism for each little thing that they want to explain. So, for example, the famous Cretaceous extinction, they say, well, there was this asteroid that hit the Earth. Fine. Did that kill all the animals? Absolutely not. So they say, well, what happened was, there was this great explosion, many TNT, many nuclear bombs, etc. They give you this picture, and all this debris went up in the air. Okay, so now they say, well, now it covered the whole Earth. It did not allow photosynthesis. So all plants died. Okay, let's concede that. How did the mammals survive? Well, they ate detritus. Okay, so how did the fish in the seas die? Or, whatever animals were in the seas. And they say, well, see, it turns out that the asteroid just happened to hit a pile of sulfur. And because of that, sulfur acidified the waters, and some animals couldn't take it and others could. So they have to invent all these different mechanisms to say, well, why does this one survive? Why was that one killed? Okay? And what they cannot explain specifically, at least for the Cretaceous, or really for none of the mass extinctions, is chronological selectivity. Why is it that always the old and big species die, And the little guys who radiate afterwards, why did they survive? It's always the old and big. Mother Nature is very careful in her selectivity. It's not only selectivity between species, it's chronological selectivity. So that's what you got to answer. If you can't answer that question, you're not a paleontologist. All you are is a stamp collector. You dust bones and put them in a museum. Okay. So here I have a case, one that no paleontologist can explain. It came out last year, I think November of last year. Okay. It says Madagascar. Okay, so because Madagascar has lots of variety of animals that exist nowhere else in the world. It's probably the concentration of most species that no one else has. Okay, like 80% of the species there exist nowhere else in the world. So it saw a relatively recent mass extinction event about 1,000 years ago. Okay, and when gorilla-sized lemurs, towering elephant birds, and grand tortoises were all wiped out from the island. Okay, so these big animals were wiped out. Okay, a recently published paper complicates the widely held understanding that humans were to blame for the crash. By drawing attention to the mega drought. Okay, dry land, okay, no rain, that the authors say played a role. Okay, the growing consensus that the Earth is in the throes of a sixth mass extinction has focused attention on a centuries-old ecological puzzle. Why do species suddenly disappear by the droves? Yeah, why? See, these people cannot explain mass extinction. That's the point. And they have these theories, but the theories are not selective. You cannot explain why this guy died, not the other guy died. And we've been with this for 200 years, and all they do is repeat the same theories over and over again. Okay, so it's an asteroid, climate change. You've heard all these already. I don't have to repeat them. Volcanoes, or plumes coming out of the ground. Methane, covering the earth, forbidding photosynthesis, or creating what is called as an impact winter or nuclear winter. It's always the same stuff, and you cannot explain selectivity with any of those mechanisms, with catastrophes. Okay? So this is the issue. The issue is that they cannot explain it, and they just keep going, and they just say, we're going to look for more information. You don't need any more information. You got all the information you need. You need a theory. That's what you need. And right now we don't have theories. Okay? We don't have an explanation of how this happens. Okay? And so what I can tell you is a lot of this has to do with how old a species is. Why did these animals disappear? Well, they disappeared because they were old species. Now, you're a human is born as a little baby and expands, becomes a boy or a girl, then goes through puberty and continues growing maybe to the age of 20, 25, whatever, and then at some point turns the corner, becomes old, wrinkled, like me. I'm approaching 70, okay? And what happens at that point? Well, at some point you die. You turn the corner, you die. Very simple. How about a species? Does a species grow old? How can you tell if a species is old? Are humans old? Maybe we're an old species. And people say, no, we're not an old species. We've been around, 200,000 years? And again, the dinosaurs have been around for 2 million years, or some of them, like the T-Rex, apparently have been around for only the last 2 million years. Before that, there were other dinosaurs. So hold it. The T-Rexes, at least, they were the apex predator, and they were around for 2 million years, and Mother Nature only gave us 200,000 years, and we're going to become extinct now? Come on, Bill, what are you talking about? Well, all I can tell you is humans are a very old species, not according to how many times the Earth went around the sun. Humans are an old species according to Mother Nature's rules, okay? And all I can show you is what those rules are, okay? Here they are. These are my take on those rules, if I can get this thing up there. How to tell whether a species is old, okay? Low reproductive rate, okay? Long lives. We live long lives. We're one of the big animals that lives the longest, okay? Maybe turtles beat us, maybe some other animal out there. In general, we're among the top honchos in that category. We're immune to natural diseases in the wild. Okay? So, we don't die of diseases anymore. Today we have genetic problems. Old age, at some point, you cannot live forever for whatever reason, right? And so we die of heart ailments and circulatory problems. We don't die of smallpox anymore, which has been eradicated. We don't die from the childhood diseases anymore. Again, 50% of the children under the age of 5 would die from childhood diseases. People 200 years ago saw death every day. They had a neighbor who was pregnant and the baby came out wrong, or was immediately attacked by one of the childhood diseases, and that was it. And one of the two, either through vaccines, for those of you who believe in vaccines, or through natural selection, right? Those who could not resist these diseases died, and those who could gave birth to us. That's why we are all clones today, because we went through the same sifting process. Whether you're Japanese, you're African, you're Russian, you're South American, or North American, it doesn't matter. Our forefathers went through the same sifting process of diseases. We had better all be more or less the same. None of us die of these childhood diseases anymore. You know, a couple of people here on the planet, that's it. It doesn't kill us anymore by the millions like it used to. Okay, so let's get all that right. And sedentary. We don't migrate anymore. You know, the last time we migrated, I think, was when Columbus discovered America, and shortly after, that was it. And now we've conquered all the continents. I don't think there's another continent out there, but let me know, okay, if I'm wrong. So we've conquered all the continents, and what's worse is we didn't have to adapt to many things in those continents except disease, okay? Climate, we adapt very easily. We put a coat on if it's cold. We take it off when it's hot. So we do not have to force our bodies to make any adjustments to environmental changes, because we have all these artificial ways of protecting ourselves from extremes. So if you go to the North Pole, you don't go nude like you would be in the equator. No, you put a coat on, at least. The rest can be nude. And Cope's Law, we're large. We're among the largest mammals on Earth, okay? And among the largest mammals, hominids in our dynasty. If you go, you know, you've seen the little chart where you go from monkey to modern man. It's always from small to big. We've grown over time in size. So those are the 5 criteria to know if a species is old, and we meet all 5 of them. We are an old species by those standards. And the reason we got old, we conquered diseases very quickly because our populations expanded. We migrated very fast across the planet. And technology helped us adapt to many things, among them better living conditions, cleaner conditions, and so on. So you know, diseases don't kill us anymore. We don't have to fight diseases anymore. Our great-grandfathers did that. Okay, so we don't have to worry about all that anymore. And so, yeah, we're an old species. And I'm saying this is what happened to some of those animals, probably on Madagascar Island. Okay? They were probably an old species. They were around for a long time. And that's probably what happened to them. So when one went out, the predator who preyed on that herbivore maybe went out as well, and so on. You know, they probably went extinct, one right after another, and approximately at the same time, geological time, maybe within 100 years. Okay, here's just another vision of that, okay, that you want to ponder. I say that these parrots and the macaws and the sequoias, I'm saying these are old species. Okay, and here we read a couple of people who studied these things, and they can't figure out certain things which they would have been able to figure out if they knew what an old species is. It says, we suggest the extreme longevity in parrots has evolved in response to species-specific characteristics of diet, habitat, and behavior. Another one says, viability of the sequoia seed is low, typically well below 15%. So that means that they have very little reproduction, right? The low viability may be an adaptation to discourage seed predators. No, they don't realize that these trees, just like the macaws there, are very old animals. They are sedentary. They don't migrate. They have very few children. They're big. They have all the diseases of old age. Okay, so that's why these trees and animals here, this bird, that's why they have all these problems, or that's why they have all these characteristics. Okay, and there at the bottom you see a couple papers that have been done in quite a bit of detail. It says increased reproductive effort has been found to be associated with a considerable reduction in what? Longevity in a number of organisms. They mentioned a couple. But they reached the wrong conclusion because they say the cost of reproduction might in part result from a trade-off in the allocation of resources between fecundity and body maintenance or growth. No, absolutely not. It's what they're looking at is old species. That's what they're looking at. Okay? And again, you have to find out what an old species is. You have to find out if species can grow old. And I'm saying again, An old species is one that has lost genetic diversity. So you can tell how old a species is by looking at how much diversity is. And it's not a rate like this first guy said. No, it's a cross section. You look at what the diversity is. If it's very little diversity compared to other animals, then that one's an old species. That's one issue. The other issue is that all mammals have been around for a long time. So all mammals have lost almost their entire genetic diversity, some more than others. Some are ahead, some are a little behind, but all mammals have lost their genetic diversity. If we went back in time, 200,000 years ago, we would find more genetic diversity among mammals than we find today. That's my argument, okay? And I'm saying genetic diversity is a measure of how long a given species has been on the planet. Okay? That's my argument. Take it or leave it, okay? Okay, let's move on. Fellow says, many women today do the natural birthing method usually in a river, because I'm saying that, you know, the ladies tomorrow, if there's a group that survives, okay, the economic collapse, women will not have children. And you say, why? Won't we start the race again like Adam and Eve, you know, start reproducing and procreating again? And I'm saying no, for many reasons. First of all, there's a psychological issue. You hear the whole world has collapsed. You're the last family on Earth. You know, you're not going to start having babies because you got a psychological impact. You know what happened. That's one issue. But then there's this issue that this fellow raises, and that's that he thinks that women are going to have babies in the river. Women first, there's 10 women on the planet that have babies in the water. You know, very few women do that. Great majority of women go to a hospital and they want to have the best care possible, because if they need a cesarean, they want a doctor to be there with a, you know, with a little knife, opening them up and putting anesthesia and all this good stuff. You know, when the global collapse happens, there won't be any of that. There won't be any doctors. And this woman, yeah, you can say she can have it in the river. Yeah, you think she's going to risk that? Especially a city girl of today? We're not talking about women 200, 300 years ago. We're talking about women of today from the city. They don't have babies, let alone have babies in the river. But even if they decide to have a baby in the river, it's a big risk for her, aside from the fact that she's needed for the subsistence agriculture of that society. We're talking about 10, 15 people. And she's going to have the last child on Earth with her brother? For what? So, no, having it in the river doesn't change anything. Okay, and again, women don't have children in the river. 99% of them don't. There's a lot of women that do out there, you know, who knows how many. But most women just go to the doctor and they want to be on the safe side. That's the reality, especially city girls. You know, country girls, they might still do that. And some do it in the bathtub, you know, because that's what they want to do. That's what they learned. That's what they saw on Google. And they say, well, I think I'm going to risk it. I'm going to go to the bathtub. But the great majority go to a hospital. Okay, another fellow says, a comment says, 80% of the population wouldn't recognize food growing out of the ground, let alone know what to do with it. And he's totally right. I think a lot of these city people, especially those who do, home office, I don't think they know what a potato is like, a potato plant looks like. In fact, I didn't know until I started growing my own potatoes. Then I learned the difference between a potato plant and a watermelon plant. You know, then you finally find out the differences. Otherwise, you can't tell the difference. You don't know. I mean, you know, if you've been in the city all your life. And I think a lot of the kids today, they probably think that potato chips grow on trees. You know, who knows? Another fellow says something that made me laugh. Nothing ever really went extinct. Life finds a way. Plants and animals just change after something like a pole reversal or a continental drift, causing the weather to change on whole continents. And you might say, well, do people really believe this? And yeah, you'll find people out there who actually believe that T-Rex did not disappear. He turned into a bird. He grew wings at the last moment and started flying around. He turned into the condor. That was a T-Rex. That's what they believe. So yeah, all I can tell you is the following. You want to do Extinction 101 before you do Extinction 102. You want to know how a mass extinction happens before you talk about human extinction. Unfortunately, I didn't get to do that with Mr. Dutton. I had sent them some stuff, and it would have been great if we would have followed the charts. It would have been a much more organized discussion, debate. But instead, we drifted off into genetic diversity, which I haven't prepared any graphs or anything to show, so I could not talk too much about genetic diversity. So yeah, this fellow's right. I did not make my case because that wasn't supposed to be my case. My case was supposed to be about mass extinction. Okay? And as far as the homework, a fellow answered it the other day, so I don't think I'm going to put that back up again unless I just comment on it or whatever. Why do animals on land die approximately at the same time as animals in the seas? Fellow says that they more or less start at the same time, at the same starting line. And this is the graph, okay? I just want to show it one more time. And that's that, and again, it's not that clear cut, and I'll mention that in a second. But, you know, you have the seed ferns and the ferns in general. They were for the era known as the Permian and Triassic. So there you had 100 million years in which these plants covered the land. What came after? The conifers, the gymnosperms. That's Jurassic and Cretaceous, another 130 plus years, okay? And then today, since that time, we've had the angiosperms, in other words, the flowering plants. Okay, and you can see that it's getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Okay, the frequency, right, or the distance between beginning and end. And again, some of these plants, it's not like some seed ferns started 250 million years ago and then died 200 million years ago, 50 million years like there you see in the Triassic. No, what happened is a lot of these tiny animals and the new plants, they started perhaps in the mid-Permian. And they worked their way outwards, and then suddenly the big guys died 250 million years ago, and these other ones were able to radiate and go into the Triassic. But they didn't start at 250 million years ago. They probably started 275 million years ago or thereabouts, or even earlier. And they started expanding at the expense of the ones that were dying, the older plants. Okay, so just keep that in mind. It's the history of life on Earth, essentially. So that's why when I say that, you know, the reason animals on land die approximately at the same time as the animals in the seas, I'm essentially regurgitating the history of life on Earth. And that is that when these guys died, right, on a mass extinction, what continued were a radiation of newer plants and smaller animals, which now begin to radiate and become the fauna and flora of the next period.